LNG Jordan Cove pipeline, and we have, for the last several meetings, had folks participate. And as you all well know, the Land Board is responsible for a number of subjects, but the primary role is the acquisition, management, and sale of some state-owned lands that were given to Oregon by the federal government when Oregon became a state. And the items on the Land Board meeting today concerning proposed land sales are a really great example of what the Land Board does. We have in Oregon very strong public meetings laws, and the purpose of those laws is to assure that the public has prior notice when a state or local agency is going to consider a particular topic. The Land Board follows our public meetings laws by publishing an agenda at its meetings, which we do, I believe, well in advance of the meetings. And as a courtesy, in the past couple of meetings, the Land Board has heard from members of the public who are concerned about the Jordan Cove project and the Pacific Connector pipeline. We have done this even though the Jordan Cove project and the pipeline were not on the agenda for meetings. And even though discussions concerning the project, decisions concerning the project will be made by Department of State Land and not by the Land Board or its members. I think it's fair to say, and I'm happy to let the other Land Board members speak as well, but we are well aware that there is substantial opposition to the Jordan Cove project. And at this point in time, we're not going to continue hearing about Jordan Cove when it's not on the agenda. And we are not the ones making the decisions about this project. So from my perspective, it's not fair for everyone when there's been no notice. And it only seems to mislead the public about how decisions are made. So if you have information or have concerns about Jordan Cove or the Pacific Connector that you want to share, I would really encourage you to contact the Department of State Lands, which operates the state program that will require permits for the project. And Jim, I'm sure, as the director of the Division of State Lands, would be happy to provide specific contact information. Many of you know what that is, but Director Paul, if you'd like to give that information, that would be great.
Yes, thank you, Governor. We do have a general public comment method via our website for folks to send in comments. You can also send in comments directly to our street address here at our headquarters building, 775 Summer Street Northeast, zip code 97301. And you can address it to myself or any of our staff in our Aquatic Resource Management Program.
That being said, folks are welcome. We'd love to have you stay and listen to our discussions today and as we move forward on a number of decisions that we're making. Any of the Land Board members wish to comment? Okay. All right. Well, with that, I'll open the consent agenda.
So good morning, Governor Brown, members of the board. Before we get started on the consent agenda, I do just want to make a note that we have done some work on our microphones in this room, and hopefully they are all working well enough that we don't need to use the ice cream cone method and can actually you can stand at a distance, and as long as you speak up, they should be working fine. If not, folks can let us know, and we're able to still do some adjustments if there are still any issues with the public hearing the meeting. First item on the consent agenda, 1A, is a request for approval of the minutes from the April 12th, 2016 State Land Board meeting.
That'd be great. Thank you, Secretary Atkins.
I move adoption of the minutes from the April 12th, 2016 Land Board meeting.
Secretary Atkins moves adoption of the minutes from the April 12th, 2016 State Land Board meeting.
Second.
Any further discussion? Any objection? Hearing and seeing none, so ordered.
Thank you. And I just realized that I need to go through all 4 of the consent agenda items.
Yes.
My mistake. And
That's
then
okay.
and then have you make the motion. So I'll go through the next 3, and then we can
do
do
those
that
all in a bundle.
all together. Thank you. So the item 1C, or excuse me, 1B, is a request from the Moline family to acquire the subsurface mineral and geothermal rights on their property located in Polk County, and whether or not the land board should authorize the release of approximately 56 acres of mineral and geothermal rights held by the state land board. On January 14, 2016, DSL received an application from the Moline family for the release of the mineral rights on this property. We went through our routine, a regular process of having the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries analyze those, the subsurface rights and the potential for mineral and geothermal extraction. They found low to no likelihood of there being mineral rights on this site. So the department is recommending that we release these rights to the Moline family. We typically receive a levy of a $10 charge per acre. This will be a charge of approximately $560 to release these mineral rights. Item C is a similar item. This was a request also for the release of mineral rights located, however, in Josephine County of 62 acres of lands owned by the Lloyd Family Trust. We received an application from the trust in November 16, 2015 to release the mineral and geothermal rights held by the State Land Board. We again had Dogami analyze this site, and they found there was no or low potential for significant mineral or geothermal rights existing on the site. The department recommends the release and transfer of these rights, and will again levy the $10 per acre charge, which would come to a sale price of $620 to release these mineral rights. And then moving on to 1D. Item 1D is a request for approval to initiate the review and determination for the potential sale or exchange of approximately 708 acres of agricultural lands in Malheur County. This would initiate the beginning of our process to evaluate lands for potential sale that would require another visit to the land board and a decision from the land board if, in fact, there is a department recommendation to execute a transfer or a sale. This particular property, a state-owned property, has been developed for irrigated agriculture since the 1960s and farmed more or less continuously through 2012 in conjunction with 14,000 acres of adjoining private lands by a private landowner called Skyline Farms. That landowner, for the duration of that period, owned and operated the water delivery system that also delivered the water to the state-owned lands that we leased to that entity. In 2012, this landowner went bankrupt and defaulted on the lease. The adjacent property has changed hands a couple times. We have been in negotiations attempting to get a new lease with the new landowner, but unfortunately we have not been able to be successful in negotiating that lease to date, primarily due to an unresolved question around the current status of water rights ownership pertinent to the state-owned properties. Given the situation, we are recommending that we move forward with conducting the due diligence related to potential sale or exchange in case that is the route that ultimately the department may recommend we go that would be in the best interest of the trust. Another issue why this is fairly timely is that the land is currently fallow and the water rights are not being used, and they potentially be jeopardized by non-use if that were to continue for much longer. I believe we have another year or two before we run the risk of those rights being extinguished. Upon approval of this item, the department would then be evaluating these lands as we do with all potential sales using our criteria, our land evaluation criteria in our 2012 real estate asset management plan, and all of the due diligence steps that we would do as part of any potential land sale or exchange. And so to conclude, the department recommends that the land board authorize the department to initiate the review and determination for the potential sale or exchange of these 708 acres in Malheur County.
Any questions? Can I get a motion on the remaining items, the consent agenda?
Yes, I move adoption of agenda items B, C, and D on the consent agenda.
Second.
Secretary Atkins moved adoptions of the items B, C, and D on the consent agenda. It was seconded by Treasurer Wheeler. Hearing and seeing no objection, so approved. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the information items on your agenda today, which we have two. The first one is to provide the State Land Board with an overview of the current work going on around development of an Oregon Marine Debris Action Plan. Just to provide some context for the work of this action plan and us bringing it before you. Oregon's territorial sea, which of course the Department of State Lands has oversight of through DSL, extends for 3 miles offshore, encompasses about 1,000 square miles of beaches and ocean waters. And the State Land Board, of course, is charged with managing this land on behalf of all Oregonians for public trust values that include navigation, fisheries, commerce, and recreation. An issue that's been becoming an increasing concern within the marine environment and the territorial sea is the growing accumulation of marine debris and the challenge of how it can be addressed in light of the public trust values that the Department of State Lands is mandated to protect on behalf of the State Land Board. Oregon is currently in the middle of working in collaboration with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Marine Debris Program and a planning committee that has been formed to develop Oregon's first ever statewide action plan on marine debris. So with that, I'd like to invite up to the table 3 of the members of the planning committee and to introduce themselves and to walk through just a brief presentation around the work of this committee and on this action plan.
Good morning and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, members of the board. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here and present on the Oregon Marine Debris Action Plan. My name is Nir Barnea. I'm a regional coordinator with the NOAA Marine Debris Program. My area of operation is Washington and Oregon, and I have worked with many partners in Oregon over the years. Charlie Plybon and I will present together. I will go over marine debris, what it is, the impact of it, and then provide an overview of the action plan. And Charlie will continue and with topics that are more specific to Oregon. So, marine debris, we see it on the beaches, and we know that marine debris has many impacts. That is just a partial list, what you see there. And marine debris actually impact across the board. It impacts the environment, commerce, and navigation, and even human health and safety. Here are some slides to show you how a line entangles in a propeller of a ship. And in one case, maybe more, one familiar case, a line caused the sinking of a ferry with 230 people on board. Derelict fishing gear entangled marine mammals and other wildlife. Coastal pollution, of course, impacts tourism who wants to go to a dirty beach, but also the plastic, sometimes small pieces, sometimes pieces that then break down into small pieces, stay there. It's really advantageous to remove them as quickly as possible and not leave them there. Microplastic is an emerging issue of marine debris. Small pieces of plastic that are ingested by organisms, and they have the capacity to absorb chemicals. And we are not quite sure what their impact is. The more we find out, the more we are concerned about.
Nir, can you, and you may not be able to answer the question, I had read somewhere that I think when we're talking microplastics, I assume we're talking about the tiny particles that are in primarily beauty products. Has the United States banned those yet?
Yes, Congress has banned microbeads, which is small pieces of plastic in cosmetic product. But then there are many other type of plastics that become microplastics. Larger pieces of plastic break down into smaller ones, and then you have microplastics. That is one reason why it is so important to remove marine debris from the beaches, because pieces that stay there basically break down over time.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I could just interject, Charlie Plyben, thank you, Governor, and
Thank you.
Land Board for having me. Charlie Plyben, Oregon Surfrider Foundation, I'm the policy manager. Just to kind of jump in and build off of what he said, microplastics, the large amount of the microplastics that we see is actually photodegraded plastic from other things. So you can imagine a straw, a plastic lid, or another thing, sort of photodegrading in the environment and then turning into these sort of small pieces of plastic. Very challenging to pick up. I'd also sort of like to spotlight that bottom right picture because this is pertinent to the Land Board and Department of State Lands. That is debris, and that is microplastic. That's styrofoam. It's not actually pollution, I guess. It is now. But that was from an authorized structure registered with the Department of State Lands as it's a 150-foot dock that washed out. So this kind of gets into why is it important to the Department of State Lands to think about these things, and we'll get a little bit more into that as we kind of get through the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Oregon has done some remarkable work on marine debris and is doing it as we speak. There are regularly scheduled beach cleanups in Oregon that are organized by SOLV and other, and with wide participants from the general public. There is rapid response to marine debris that Charlie has organized a number of these because marine debris does not show up only just before there is a scheduled cleanup, but it shows up anytime. And it is very important to remove it quickly, especially from sensitive location. The largest crab pot removal project along the West Coast took place right here in Oregon. It was in 2009, 2010 with funding from the stimulus, ARRA. And this funding went to very good use, partnership between Oregon and Oregon fishermen and Oregon agencies, and they removed over 3,000 parts. Oregon also has a very effective abandoned and derelict vessel program where Oregon State Marine Board remove vessels that had sunk, but they also have a program where owners of vessels that may sink soon may transfer the title to the state. It's called a turn-in program, and then the state removes these vessels before they sink when it costs so much to remove them. Next. Oregon has also been engaged in a really impressive public outreach and education, because we know that with marine debris it is changing hearts and minds. A lot of it is. And just a couple of examples, Wash the Shore down in Benton create beautiful statues made completely of marine debris. And here is just example. This Henry's a fish right here. And then they travel with these statues to different locations around the nation. The last one was just last week in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian Zoo. A very, very impressive exhibit. And they couple it with outreach to teachers and to students. Sea Grant developed STEM-based curriculum that is available online and is used nationwide. Oregon also has a nice tradition of getting together to address marine debris. After the Japan tsunami marine debris started washing ashore, Oregon agencies, NGOs, industry got together and formed the Japan Tsunami Marine Debris Task Force, which was critical, a key component of removing a dock that arrived on Agata Beach near Newport. Oregon NGOs and others formed the Oregon Marine Debris Team, and they also addressed Japan tsunami marine debris as it came on shore, as you can see here, cleanup on the beaches, and also conducted very, very impressive, very thorough outreach and education to the public that was really hungry to know what is this marine debris all about and what kind of impact it will have. Next. So if things are so good, then why have a marine debris action plan? To sum it very succinctly, a marine debris action plan helps us be more collaborative and more effective in dealing with marine debris. It helps us to coordinate our efforts to prevent and remove marine debris. It improves communication. It already has. We came together for a workshop, and even as a result of this workshop, communication greatly improved. When we get together and think of marine debris and what we can do about it, it really helped us identify future priorities and future projects. And before the workshop, a survey, a questionnaire went out to participants, and they identified over 80 priorities for Oregon, which was really fantastic. Having a program in place and having the document in place, having a plan in place, help us track action that are completed and the objectives that we have achieved. And then the plan is there and the document is there available for all to see, and it informs decision makers and others who want to know what are the priorities and what are the projects that are ongoing and that deserve action and deserve attention. And finally, and very importantly, when a group of people working on marine debris get together, they are from agencies, NGOs, industry, academia, and they all identify an actions that they would like to take, it is very important. And it conveys the message that we really like to take care of it. And if funding is an issue, it rises to the top. And entities that do have fund and can provide funding look at it, and it really helps them shape their priorities as well. So where are we at right now with a marine debris action plan? The first step was to assess interest, and we were done with that. There was overwhelming support to create the plan. We planned the first workshop, and then we conducted it in April 13 and 14. We are now drafting the interim plan that will undergo several reviews. And at the same time, we have already started planning for the second workshop, and actually we locked on the dates. It's going to be in early November. And following that, information from the second workshop will all be included in the final draft of the action plan. And I'd like to emphasize that this action plan, yes, it is facilitated by the NOAA Marine Debris Program, but it is the information in there and the material in there is all from the state. And then the plan will be finalized, and what we hope to see are future projects to which different entities committed to and undertook to execute a list of priorities that is already there, and also the existing projects that are now ongoing, maybe given some more thought. Can we bring in more partners? Do we need some more resources to complete these existing projects the best we can? Next. Just a few words on the first workshop. It was done mostly in smaller breakout groups for land-based activities, ocean-based activities, and education. The different workshop reviewed the priorities that were gleaned before the workshop, and of them, they distilled several objectives for each workshop. Using these objectives, they brainstormed project that fit these objectives, and then they started actually filling in what we need to execute this project. We also talked about the different plan elements and the communication, how we want to communicate among ourselves and to others, and we agreed on the next steps. Next. So how do we see the action plan over time? Next. Of course, very, very important part is to implement the project and the activities that are listed in the action plan, because when all said and done, the action plan basically is a work plan for the different entities working on marine debris. Next. We really would like to communicate. We all know how important communication is. Next. The action plan will help us prioritize projects, and as I stated earlier, it will help obtain funds and other resources, because a lot of thought went into identifying what is needed for the project. We will review the project periodically. As in other regions, we will meet every 2 or 3 years, get together and talk about the action plan, come up with new projects, check the boxes for projects that have been completed, and see if we need to make changes to the plan. Next. And, of course, we would like to network with other regions because there are some existing plans already in Hawaii, Great Lakes, Virginia, and there is the beginning of action plan creation in California and in Alaska. So hopefully there will be Oregon action plan, Washington later on, Alaska, California, and other regions, and we can network with everyone. There is a lot of lessons learned that we can share and make work on marine debris more collaborative nationwide. And with that, Charlie, please.
Thanks, Nir. I am here because I thought you might want to hear from somebody from Oregon who actually does marine debris work on the ground. My name is Charlie Plyben. I'm the Oregon Policy Manager for Surfrider Foundation. For those of you who aren't familiar with Surfrider, we are a grassroots nonprofit environmental organization dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of our oceans, waves, and beaches. Marine debris is a big issue for us in Oregon. I think folks think of SOLVE a lot when they think of beach cleanups, and we do about 3 times the amount of annual cleanups that SOLVE does because we are coastal. We have chapters organized. We respond to marine debris events. We plan a lot of cleanups, and I'd like to take this back to why is this a state land board issue? What is it about the Department of State Lands that has anything to do with marine debris? And you know, as the landlords, so to speak, of our waterways, submerged and submersible lands, you guys authorize a lot of registrations, a lot of leases for varying types of uses. You do that under your constitutional right and to protect the public trusts. And those public trusts not only include allowing for those sorts of uses, but other types of enjoyment, other types of uses, such as recreation. In Oregon, by and large, the number one amount of marine debris that we find in our estuaries and on our beaches in the wintertime are from registered docks, registered or potentially leased other facilities, a lot of homeowners. We have some trashy tenants in Oregon, believe it or not. And that stuff comes downstream. It's hard to believe, but when it comes out of Portland, it makes its way down the Columbia, and it eventually hits a beach, maybe Gerhardt Beach, maybe goes north, and it hits a beach up in Longview, and maybe we don't care as much about it if it's in Washington. But for us here in Oregon, we do care about this. And I'd like to go back to that second slide because this kind of really highlights the issue. That bottom right picture, you can see what looks like snow as far as you can see. That's styrofoam. That styrofoam came from a dock that washed out. It's about a 60-foot dock out of Coos Bay. That washed up in 2013, and we're still cleaning that up today. There was no funding that came from the Department of State Lands nor from the individual that was registered with that facility to clean that up. Volunteers from Surfrider Foundation and OPRD bore the responsibility of that cleanup. And I think it ended up somewhere around $50,000 by the time it was done. So this is not uncommon. This is something that we see often. And, you know, I think leases and other agreements with the Department of State Lands and tenants, so to speak, they get checked up on maybe regularly. But these registrations, these small docks and other facilities, they don't. There's very little inspection. You have over 2,500 registrations in the state of Oregon, so you can imagine it's probably staff limited on the amount of enforcement and inspection you can do on those facilities. Those are often renewed pretty regularly without any kind of inspection or monitoring. So that's one problem that we see. You know, I commend the Department of State Lands in introducing the Submerged Land Enhancement Fund back in 2015. That bill established a fund to help clean up some of these problem areas, particularly looking at some of the derelict and abandoned vessels and structures that we find that get washed out. But these things affect not just people that like to enjoy the beach and otherwise, but give the facility manager at Hat Mill Marine Science Center a call and find out what he deals with. They have a stretch of property there in Yaquina Bay. On average, they receive about 150 to 200 tires a year that wash up that they're responsible for disposing of and dealing with. See, these sorts of things affect a lot of people, and there are improvements that we can make. The Submerged Land Enhancement Fund's a good start. There's a lot of unclarity about how much funds are going to be deposited into that Common School Fund, and what we'll see actually trickle into the Submerged Land Enhancement Fund itself. I know the department's authorized to go up to 20%, I believe, 20% of those funds towards submerged land enhancement. But it's right now it's not clear how much of that's going to go, and I imagine that has a lot to do with staff capacity and resources within department. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that I also serve on the Ocean Policy Advisory Council. I represent non-fishing recreation. And marine debris was identified as a major issue. In the fall of last year, we went through a visioning exercise led by Sea Grant for the Ocean Policy Advisory Council. And marine debris, ocean or coastal resiliency, ocean acidification, as well as some updates to the Territorial Sea Plan were among the major priorities that group identified. So we've actually, worked with NOAA here and established a work group and a planning team beyond OPAC to get this action planning started, and we're excited to get this started for the state of Oregon.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Treasurer Wheeler.
Just one question. You hinted at the answer, but I want to make sure I understood it. Do you have a sense of what percentage of the debris that's coming onto our shores is locally generated as opposed to coming from somewhere else? Is it the vast majority is locally generated?
Yeah, and I could give you a number, and it would be kind of cowboy math, and I won't do that. But I can generalize in what we say kind of nationally, worldwide. Over 80% is land-based debris, much of that plastic. Here in Oregon, by and large, the large majority of what we see on our coast and on our waterways comes from us here in Oregon. I think that we like to think about all this stuff that washes up from the tsunami event or other fisheries that happen offshore that we can't really control, maybe. But coming from somebody who's done over 500 beach cleanups in my lifetime here in Oregon, I can tell you that by and large, the majority of it's from us here in Oregon.
So could I ask one more question,
sure.
Governor? Will your effort get as far as recommending strategies to reduce the amount of garbage that's actually going into waterways? I mean, it seems like you're doing the great work, and I really want to applaud you and your volunteers for the efforts you're undertaking. I think it's hugely important, but you're not our mother.
Yeah.
And we need to learn to clean up for ourselves and not dump things into waterways and assume that it's going somewhere else. Are you going to make a series of concrete recommendations to cities, to counties, to the state?
The goal, so the action planning itself is more of a work plan, and for the sake of NOAA, I don't think they're real comfortable getting into the policy recommendation end of that. However, it has been identified by the folks that are producing this document that's of high interest. In fact, it's called out several times as an objective. My goal with the Ocean Policy Advisory Council is actually to do just that, is to look at some of these actions and look at where we can make policy recommendations to the governor's office based on what's coming out of this. So,
one more comment, Governor. I would hope that as you do this, you would seek the support of me and others in encouraging ways to actually get you out of the business of beach cleanups. I would actually like to see us go to the source and actually stop the behavior. And so
I'd call it a business if we got any money for it. We're actually completely unfunded for marine debris work in Oregon, but yeah, absolutely. That's our motto. Is that we love doing beach cleanups, but not that much. We'd rather not have to clean up the beaches.
Right.
So,
how are you funded? Are you philanthropically funded?
We're philanthropically funded through foundations and our membership base. But we have a pretty small membership base in Oregon compared to like California, where you have.
One final question.
Go ahead,
I promise
Treasurer
I'll
Wheeler.
stop.
We know you're really a surfer.
NOAA is involved in this. So is there any intention at some point in going to the federal government and asking for support for local governments to be able to do this kind of work?
I wouldn't be doing this action planning process with the state of Oregon if I didn't think by some way, shape, or form it might better position us for funding with the federal government and with other entities. Whether or not that will happen, you guys know with the federal government and what funding looks like, and those are gambles, but I know that this is a step that we can take that shows that we're collaborating, we're coordinated, and hopefully we'll be funded.
Yeah, thanks.
I will just add that having a marine debris action plan really helps NOAA, and not just NOAA, EPA and others who has funding to see what are the priorities for the state and what project and activities the state want to do. So because the plan is a result of a bunch of entities getting together and figuring out what their priorities are. So I think having a plan is a pretty powerful tool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Atkins.
Following up on that, I wanted to say we're very glad that NOAA is taking the leadership to help facilitate these processes, because it is the kind of process that you need to encounter, engaged in before you can speak well to the federal government, to speak well to the governor, anybody else about what are the priorities and what should we do. So I'm really pleased that this process is going on. I want to come back to the responsibility of the Department of State Lands and where the Land Board and our policy leadership around budget and a number of other things might apply. When we come to December 16th and a final plan, does that come to the State Land Board to adopt? Is this a collaborative plan that director can speak for us, and then we take whatever our portion of responsibility is and hear from staff about it? Christian, let's speak to that.
Sure, please.
I don't believe. Good morning, Governor Brown, Treasurer Wheeler, Secretary Atkins. For the record, Chris Costelli with the Oregon Department of State Lands. I don't believe that this plan comes back to the Land Board. We're providing it to you for a couple reasons that have been brought up by both Director Paul and by Charlie. The first being the Department and the Land Board's broad jurisdiction over navigable waterways, meander lakes, and of course the 1,000 square miles of the territorial sea. And that this was identified, as Charlie brought up just a moment ago, as a priority for OPAC. And OPAC has some responsibilities to provide guidance and advice to LCDC, but also to the State Land Board and their statutes. So we thought it was a good opportunity to have them come forward and bring you this informational item. With that said, if we get to a plan and it's something you guys would like to see, the final product, I'm sure we could make that available.
Understanding what obligations the department is taking on and what the goals and priorities are will be useful to us all.
And Governor Brown, if I could speak to that, Secretary of State Atkins, I think it would be helpful if the Ocean Policy Advisory Council received some guidance on just that maybe the governor is looking for some policy recommendations out of this. I think that the advisory council forgets the position that they are in sometimes, and I think it is the responsibility of the governor to direct the Ocean Policy Advisory Council and ask for their recommendations when possible. So that would be a potential ask.
So, Charlie, that was actually going to be my follow-up to Secretary Atkins' questions, and I'm assuming you're the only one that's on both the Oregon Marine Debris Action Plan Committee as well as the OPAC Committee. Are you the only one that's crossing over?
No,
Okay.
actually,
Chris Costelli. Okay.
Governor Brown, yeah, I'm representing the department as a non-voting member. I'm on the planning committee and the Marine Debris Action Plan, but also represent the department on OPAC, non-voting. But I think you were going to say probably David Allen is also.
David is as well. Okay, great.
Yeah, David Allen.
So I guess my request would be that we can't wait until the plan is done in terms of drafting legislation for the 2017 legislative session, and I'd love to hear from you and David and other folks specific recommendations that you might have not 30, but 1, 2, or 3 would be very useful. 2 would be great, perfect. And meeting with Gabriella Goldfarb from my office to talk about what we can do to get to be more proactive, and happy to take a look at what kind of legislation we can introduce for the 2017 legislative session. And then secondly, Chris, I think for you, I assume as we are dealing with docks, and Charlie showed us the picture of the dock that had kind of disintegrated out of, what was it out of?
Polystyrene.
Polystyrene. I assume that we have some ability to control what types of materials that docks are made out of, and I'd love to hear from DSL moving forward, kind of what controls and limitations we can put on the types of materials people are using to build docks.
Sure, Governor Brown, that's a good point. As something we can look at moving forward. Actually, foam encapsulation, that was the foam that floats the docks, is regulated by the Oregon State Marine Board. You saw also some slides with regards to abandoned and derelict vessels. The department, actually, this was brought to the dock that Charlie's brought up in his slideshow, was brought to the Legislative Assembly during a committee meeting a few years back. Yes, and from that point forward, I think we've had much better coordination with our fellow state agencies that regulate, in this case, vessels and foam encapsulation. And I would note that the Marine Board is just starting rulemaking to update their foam encapsulation rules. But yeah, I mean, what we're looking for coming out of this, as well as the agency, and it sounds like the Land Board is too, is some help that will, some recommendations that will guide future policy and practices of the department.
Okay, thank you. And I assume the other issue is resources, tools for the department and the Marine Board to tackle these issues as well, both in terms of inspection and enforcement.
Governor Brown, that's always a consideration, yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Secretary Atkins, I sort of jumped in. Anybody else? Thank you very much.
Governor Brown, I have
ahead.
one more request. It's not every day that I get to present to such an established body, and I would like to request a photo with you guys, which I can hang around till after the meeting, if that's all right, but would love to have a photo with you guys.
I suspect you can get members to do a photo after the meeting, so thank you.
I want to thank
Mayor?
you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate your heartfelt and passionate work around this issue. I think we are all very concerned and look forward to working with you very closely, and very pleased to see you lean into this so strongly. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. So we will move on to our next item, another information agenda item. Get to my right page here. And this is our annual report on our trust property section. That's comprised of the unclaimed property and estates administration units. And I'm going to ask our trust property manager, Patrick Tate, to come up and give you an overview of that report for the results from fiscal year 2015.
Great. Thank you.
Good morning, Governor Brown and Land Board members. Pleased to be here. My name is Patrick Tate. I'm the trust property manager. And it's been 2015 was a okay year for our unit. We were learning, we were building together. Estates was added to unclaimed property, and I became the trust property manager. And so it really was a year of getting better for us. Outside of, there's a small decline in reporting for unclaimed property. The general sense is that we did well. We did have a substantial decrease in total receipts, but most of that is a timing error that simply, or I shouldn't say an error, a timing situation, in that our stock sales were delayed. And so those sales occurred in the following year, and I wish I could give you the preview of 2016, but I think you'll be pleased when we get to that report next year. Outside of that, we are just working with the agency as a whole to really look at streamlining our operations, finding ways to make it easier to do business with us, and just overall try to get better in every way and delivering services to the various stakeholders we have. And without going into too much more detail, if there's any questions, I'd be glad to hear those at this time.
Secretary Atkins, any questions?
I'm trying to remember. I think I had one. And I'll
Okay.
come back to me.
Treasurer Wheeler?
I just have a quick one. With elder abuse obviously escalating just due to demographic changes, I note that the unclaimed property fund takes up where the estate leaves off for somebody who has not filed a will, and there's a notification obligation. I forget what it is, but I think it's 48 hours or something like that. Who is required to make that notification? And who oversees that step to ensure that the notification is actually taking place so that you're receiving the assets of estates like that as opposed to somebody else simply absconding with the resources?
Thank you for the question, Treasurer Wheeler. That is a very good question. We do as best we can to try to educate the various stakeholders on that requirement to report.
Who are the stakeholders?
It could be funeral directors. It could be a landlord. It could be the medical examiner. Any number, police that come to a house for a safety check. There's just so many different scenarios where that becomes a situation where they've discovered somebody has passed, and then trying to determine heirs, and they should notify us within 48 hours. Making that how to make that practically work is a challenge for us. We do go out and educate the obvious groups, but in all situations we don't. It doesn't always occur that way. Oftentimes we will get a surprisingly information from maybe the landlord of a rental or the mortgage company who isn't getting paid suddenly, and they're trying to figure out what happened.
So there, if I may, Governor, there are thousands of small landlords across the state of Oregon, and there's no way that your organization has the capacity to reach them. Where are the teeth in this operation? Is it a mandate? Is it a requirement? Is there some sort of a process of follow-up? How do I sit here and have confidence that if somebody is alone and they die and they have assets, that those assets aren't simply being cleaned out as the next tenant prepares to move in?
And the question is, how do we enforce that? And it is, there's really, I would have to research it further to get into details, but from a practical standpoint, there's very little we can do to enforce that. It's usually something that happens. We learn about it after the fact, and we try to make things as good as we can, but you are correct that we do come into situations where several weeks or months have passed, and we have to deal with the assets that we have, and in some cases we're not sure that all the assets that were originally with that person have remained, that there may have been friends or relatives that decided to come in and take some of those things away. And in some cases there may, in the ultimate thing, that may have been perfectly fine in the end result, but it is a challenge for us. We are continuing to look at that as how do we make that process work better. But
So
it
if I
is one of
could-
the challenges.
Yeah, if I could, Governor, Treasurer Wheeler, as Pat just said, we are continually trying to make that better. And your question really strikes at the heart of the mandate of our estates administration. I mean, we are fundamentally a consumer protection program. Our charge is to do what we need to do by law, everything reasonable to find the rightful heirs of these estates and to protect that inheritance so that it does go to the right entities or persons and does not
But if
get
I
into the
may,
wrong
that's
hands.
after it gets to you.
That's after
That's
it gets
after
to
somebody's done
that-
the right thing. My question is, what happens to prevent somebody from doing the wrong thing?
Exactly, and no, Treasurer, that's exactly what the point I'm getting to, is that we do have laws that are intended to get just to that issue, but we do recognize that there is potential for improvement of those laws. Part of it is, as Pat said, you simply don't know what you don't know until we actually are able to find out that a death has occurred. We don't know what's happened beforehand. So it's to being proactive enough to know that we're getting as a reasonable, a high percentage of notification out, so we know we are getting to people and making sure they're following the law is the challenge. And I'd be happy to follow up with you to point out specifics around what the laws do allow us to do right now, how much the teeth are in them or not, and where there is room for improvement. We do.
And I'll just end on this. I just, and believe me, I'm not being critical of your work, because I believe actually your work seems to start after that moment, and I'm completely cognizant of that. I just think there may be a partnership here with the AG and some others to talk about how to tighten up the whole chain of control, if you will, that happens before your process actually commences. That's my point there. So thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Secretary Atkins.
My question actually was around the reporting year, and he did answer it. I think in his testimony that we did have property that was in stock sale proceeds, which are coming in the next year, which may bend the curve upward, as opposed to the downward one that we see.
Yes.
That we see here. And I wanted from reading it, I wanted to confirm that. He did that. So, thank you.
And kind of a preliminary, I think it's going to be, right now it's a record, there will be a record stock sale for 2016. Right at this point, it's about $17.5 million that we have received in stock sale proceeds. So we're very pleased, but part of that would have occurred in the 2015 year in a normal circumstance, but we just got delayed.
And just following up on, if I might, Governor, on the conversation that you were having with the treasurer, my assumption is that a lot of the property that's involved here is in a bank someplace or in a stock account somewhere. A financial institution has it, and that they have their own independent as well as our statute requirements. If they know that someone has passed and they know they don't have an automatic survivor or beneficiaries to let them know, and that's the majority of the assets come from that way.
Yeah, Governor, Secretary of State, that is true in terms of total value of property. That's correct. It's often the bank accounts. However, in terms of the energy and effort that we take to deal with the states, there is a significant amount that actually is spent needing to go visit the residents and inventory items on the residents and personal items that may not be of as much value as maybe lost bank accounts, but are significant work. And that's where we can sometimes, if we don't get there in the 48 hours and get that notice, sometimes there have been cases where those are the things that we lose track of and aren't able to retain. Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions? You asked and answered mine, so thank you, Secretary Atkins. Thank you very much. Appreciate the updated report.
Thank you, Landford.
Thanks.
All right, we'll move now to our action agenda items, starting with agenda item number 4, which is a request for the State Land Board to approve the Oregon Department of Forestry's proposed 2017-2019 Common School Fund portion of their budget. This stems from a requirement within our 2005 agreement between the two agencies that the department-wide budget, the Department of Forestry will present the portion of their budget in advance of when DSL must submit ours. That includes all of the monies that are needed to cover their expenses for managing the Common School Fund lands under their management. Yeah, so with that, I will invite Department of Forestry to come join me at the table to have them present this item.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Governor Brown, Treasurer Wheeler, Secretary Atkins. For the record, I'm Doug Decker, Oregon State Forester, the Director of the Oregon Department of Forestry. I'm joined this morning by Liz Dent, Chief of our State Forest Division. Consistent with the management agreement from 2005, we appear before you to introduce our 17-19 budget request for management of Common School Fund forest lands. In the past, when we've been here before you, we've focused primarily on the Elliott State Forest. But with the proposed ownership transfer, the 2017-2019 biennium will bring an end to our work on the Elliott, and our focus will shift exclusively to the 34,758 acres of common school forest land outside the Elliott, located in 18 Oregon counties. So this proposed budget, which Chief Dent is going to walk you through here in a moment, will mark the first time in 86 years since the state acquired the deeds for the Elliott State Forest in July of 1930, that the Department of Forestry will not have a presence there. Next year, as we lay off our final forest management staff in the Elliott, we will mark the end of an era and generations of close connection with and investment in this landscape and coordination with you and with your predecessors. I just wanted to note that. Once the budget request is finalized, and we do have a recommendation for you here for your approval this morning, we'll submit that as part of ODF's overall 17-19 budget request to DAS, and it begins its way through the legislative process. Liz is going to walk you through the request in detail and highlight the planned work on those 34,000 acres and the expected results on those non-Elliott lands for the coming biennium. Liz?
Great. Thank you, Doug. Governor Brown, members of the board, for the record, my name is Liz Dent. I'm the Division Chief for State Forests. As Doug indicated, we've been managing these lands, but also our Board of Forestry lands for multiple uses, and really under the goal of providing social, environmental, and economic benefits over time and across the landscape. And I would say that Department of Forestry, we really, this is part of our knowledge, skills, and abilities. This is what we do. This is what we do well. This is what we're stationed for. And this is how we've staffed the Coos office to implement the management activities for the Elliott State Forest. So with this change, I think it's fair to say that the activities on the Elliott have certainly narrowed. We all know that harvest levels have declined, and therefore the scope and scale of the Department of Forestry's management of these forests has changed. So those have all gone hand in hand. So as we enter into the beginning of this next biennium, we have built a budget in which the Oregon Department of Forestry, particularly our State Forest Division, will no longer manage the Elliott, as Doug indicated. And instead, any work that needs to be done on the forest would be carried out under a contract that would be managed by DSL. There are some remaining Board of Forestry lands in Coos County, and we will manage those out of our Western Lane district, so we'll have a staff person there. That office is outside of Veneta, and so it's really what that boils down to is that we will not have a state forest presence in that Coos office. And that would begin on July 1st, 2017. So that's the background of how we put our budget together, and with that, some sort of by the numbers conversation here is that we would expect on the remaining acres that we manage for DSL to generate a revenue of about $4.7 million in the next biennium. That would come from a harvest level of about 13.5 million board feet. And the proposed budget, based on the positions that we would need to do that work, is about $3.2 or $3.3 million. That represents a 66% reduction as compared to the 15-17 biennium, and clearly reflects the fact that Department of Forestry will no longer be managing the Elliott. Sort of the way this plays out in terms of positions, it will mean eliminating 9 positions on the Elliott State Forest. We will retain still for the management of these lands, and the budget that we proposed covers 7.5 full-time equivalent positions. And those positions are necessary for managing the remaining DSL, or Common School Forest Land acres. You'll see in the attached budget that there is still some additional FTE of about 16 FTE, of which the 7.5 are in addition to those 16. And that really represents the positions that are located in the area and Salem office. And those positions are partially funded by Department of State Lands. Those positions provide functions such as biennial budgeting, fiscal revenue forecasting, contracting, timber sales and processing those, log tracking, financial accounting, specialist expertise in fish and wildlife and roads, and those sorts of services that have to happen sort of across the state. So those are some important things I wanted to point out. And finally, in terms of the fire patrol representation in the budget, of course, that's invoiced separately to DSL from the Protection Division at ODF. And our assessment at this time is that this is subject to change based on how the land transfer plays out and the timing of that transfer, and this at this point is our current estimate. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Secretary Atkins?
So I think the only thing I wanted to just comment on is to thank you all. I'm sure it was a difficult thing to face how to make this decision given the pending decisions that are going on and how to meet the early budget requirements that we have in state government to come up with a way of doing this, and appreciate the partnership with the staff at Department of State Lands to try to get that done. I don't minimize the significance of it. And thank you.
Thank you. We'll pass it along.
Thank you. Treasurer Wheeler?
Revenues, costs, they're out of alignment?
Right. Our meeting in the next biennium,
Yes.
we would expect to come
Could
in
you
as
talk
a
about that a
positive.
little bit, please?
We would expect to generate more revenue than it's going to cost to implement the harvest units.
Good, thanks. Ouch, wish I had
And
I've done that a couple of times.
there's the exclamation mark to your comment. I would just add, and this I know is obvious to you, but just for the record, these of course are estimates, and time will tell how many sales we can actually put up, and the revenue they generate be dependent on a number of market factors.
And just to be clear, one more question.
Fire away,
if I
Treasurer
may.
Wheeler.
In the event that the state ends up owning the Elliott, if there's an interstate transfer from the department to the state, it's possible that the Department of Forestry could still be retained for that purpose of managing. Is that correct?
That's correct. The board chair and I have expressed, we've submitted a letter expressing that interest. It would have to be within some different purpose and business model structure.
Oh, yeah, there would still be flexibility within the budget cycle to be able to do that, to shift gears if that's necessary? Or would that require e-board requests? How would you actually manage that?
I feel we'd have to collectively, we'd have to fall back and kind of pencil that out
Got
and
it.
probably go to the board. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin.
Just to add to that too, it depends on the timing. As Doug said, it could be e-board if it's between session, depending on the timing. If it were to happen between now and the conclusion of the next session, there's the opportunity in the process to bring additional budget requests to the table, if that were the timing. But it'd be one of the two, just depending on when that scenario might play out, if it were to play out.
And that would obviously have to happen during the legislative process, through the budget process.
Correct.
Okay. Before we move to action item, we have two folks that have requested to testify on this action item. And so if you all don't mind stepping aside, I'd like to invite Gordon Ross. And then, I'm sorry, I can't read the last name, but it looks like Rich Royer.
If I may impose upon your good nature, I'm just going to read you I want you to know what's in there. Jesus loves you, but he doesn't vote in November, and a lot of rural people do. He's the one who's going to endear you to them. And the second one is something very few people know about grazing rights. I don't know that anyone knows it but me. It's for your edification.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. We appreciate you being here today.
Thanks.
And Rich, is it Royer? Roxer? Okay. Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. All right, we have in front of us a request for approval to submit the Department of Forestry's budget, proposed 2017-19 budget request for ODF managed common school lands to the Department of Administrative Services. Do I have a motion? Secretary Atkins moves approval of the request to submit the Department of Forestry's proposed 17-19 budget for ODF managed common school lands to the Department of Administrative Services.
Second.
We have a second from Treasurer Wheeler. Given that there's no objection to the motion, it is so approved. Thank you.
All right.
Director Paul.
Thank you, Governor. Our final agenda item, and action agenda item number, two more agenda items. Our second to final agenda item is to do with the request for approval to submit the Department of State Lands proposed 2017-19 budget request. The department is currently preparing its 17-19 budget request in accordance with the DAS budget development instructions. And before you today is a decision on approving the agency's proposed budget, which supports and maintains current service levels and also includes requests to improve our delivery of service. Our current service level budget, we estimate right now, is about $41.3 million for the biennium. And the additional policy option packages that I'll briefly walk through right now would add to that current service level. We have 10 policy option packages we are proposing. The first one, 101, is the Portland Harbor Cleanup. This package seeks additional limitation to continue to ensure the state's interests are protected in the Superfund case and continues with our current level and approach in terms of defending the state's interests on DSL's behalf. Package 102 is our Historical Filled Lands project. This includes 2 limited duration positions to begin the notification of affected landowners and perform the actions necessary to begin appropriate divestment of these lands. And this, just to note, would be the final piece of the flag recommendations that would bring closure to the extent of the DSL claims on historical filled lands across Oregon. The package number 3 is trust land management. This request would increase our capacity and coverage for the work of generating revenues, specifically from our trust lands, by adding an additional property specialist. We have, as you know, we have a dedicated rangeland property staff. We have a Department of Forestry that manages the large majority of our forest lands. The remaining 40,000 acres that are dispersed across the state. Right now, we currently have just a single property manager tasked to those lands, which involves a range of work from commercial office buildings in Portland to agricultural development to forest lands and a number of other to renewable energy potential. This additional position, we believe, would be more than pay for itself in terms of the additional revenues we believe we could produce with more resources proactively managing those lands. 104 is our Submerged and Submersible Land Enhancement Fund. This package requests limitation that would allow us to make payments out of the fund. So as was mentioned in the earlier marine debris presentation to this enhancement fund, we did receive statutory authority for this fund, as was discussed. However, we did not have the limitation approved on exercising that authority. This POP would provide us $100,000 of limitation. And just to be clear around the source of that $100,000, we are currently these monies would need to come from our statutory revenues, our revenues that are generated off our statutory work. We have, in recent history and continue today, to run very close to in terms of our revenues and expenditures on those. So we, at this point, cannot predict how much extra, so to speak, funds would be available for this purpose, but we wanted to at least put a placeholder to have something available there if the need arises and the priority arises, that we can start to use that authority. Package 105, sage grouse monitoring. This adds a seasonal position to assist in the essentially our conservation measures and monitoring and compliance work under our candidate conservation agreement with assurances that we signed with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service last fall. Under that agreement with assurances, we have some additional obligations that we need to meet to make sure we can continue to operate under that. and this seasonal position would allow us to make sure we can meet those commitments. 106 is a shared services implementation. This package seeks limitation to transfer funds to the Water Resources Department to support some shared service positions with a payroll specialist and a webmaster position. This package would approve our limitation for the agency to pay its portion of the services where the positions themselves would sit with Water Resources. 107 is a vehicle replacement package. We have a number of vehicles that are depreciated and scheduled for replacement, and this would require a limitation to lease vehicles from DAS in accordance with state procedures moving forward. This package also includes some limitation to provide funding for purchasing of 2 OHVs to support our rangeland management in Eastern Oregon. Package 108, regional team office space. This package we intend to be used to fund office space to improve our customer service to our regulated community by providing a local meeting place for DSL customers and to have our work occur more closely located to where this regulated community is with our Portland Metro team. And it would fund office space in the state office building in Portland at this point, although we are actually still looking for potentially other locations that might be more economical or convenient, and that the location could change, but these funds we believe would be adequate to cover the expenses wherever we might place this office space within the Portland metro area. Package 109 is funding high-priority nearshore research and monitoring. This package is essentially pass-through funds that would go towards funding the Oregon Ocean Science Trust. It would have funding to hire a part-time administrative staff and initial match funding for potential grant opportunities for that trust. That trust is currently organized in statute, but does not have funding to operate until, in fact, their revenue is generated off of our territorial seas from renewable resources. And this package would essentially jumpstart and provide some bridge funding for that trust to begin doing work in the meantime, and also to be well set and positioned once those projects we anticipate would occur in the coming years. And the final package, number 10, is our headquarter building maintenance. This would seek funding to upgrade the lighting of our underground parking garage and replace and repair structure on our roof that protects our HVAC system. And then finally, we will continue to be reviewing our current KPMs and considering improvements as needed. So our recommendation is that the department recommends the State Land Board approve the submission of the DSL budget to the Department of Administrative Services.
So the bad news is there's 10 policy option packages. The good news is they are not having any legislative policy. So it's sort of a trade-off. So any questions? Secretary Atkins?
Well, I was just going to note a very minimal amount of general fund requested
Yes.
within there.
Yes.
Well.
Yes.
Good news from the governor's standpoint. Other than the Oregon Ocean Science Trust, which is a discussion the legislature needs to have now.
Yes.
How to fund this thing. No, I think it's very straightforward. Thank you.
Treasurer Wheeler?
None.
All right. Is there a motion?
I move the approval of the budget recommendation.
Secretary Atkins moves approval of the DSL 2017-19 agency request budget to the Department of Administrative Services.
Second.
Second by Treasurer Wheeler. Hearing and seeing no objection. So ordered.
Great. Thank you.
Congratulations.
I put my name down to speak on this item.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed it. My apologies. I missed it. I'm very sorry. Please come on up. My apologies. I just missed it. Sorry. I didn't see it.
Thank you, Governor. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this item. In reviewing the agenda, my name is Stacy McLaughlin, and I wanted to discuss the key performance measures that are mentioned at the end of the item. I am addressing you regarding that item, and I'm specifically curious about the generalized statement relating to the measurements for improved processes and the work toward better customer service. For example, I would like to know who DSL considers to be their customer. Is it me, a citizen of the state, or a foreign corporation seeking to conduct business within the state, or is it both? and what measurements will be used to ensure equitable treatment of all customers. I would like to share with you where I consider effectiveness improvements need to be taken. And I raise these concerns on behalf of myself and other landowners. You are the stewards of the public lands. I am a steward of a private piece of property. Yesterday, the Department of State Lands granted a third extension. Let me apologize that there may be some overlap here with your admonishment. I traveled 3 hours to be here to discuss this, unaware that there would be a limitation. But I did come prepared to speak with regard to customer service. I am very concerned about the taking of private lands. And as a landowner, or I guess you might call me a customer, a tax-paying customer, I've read the state's constitution regarding property, and I believe it is in direct violation of Section 18 regarding the projects that are before you, Jordan Cove LNG, Pacific Connector, and the South Dunes Power Plant. All needed to be declared for public use. All 3 of these projects will be owned and operated for and by private corporations for private profits, not destined for public use here in the state of Oregon. These projects cannot be built without FERC approval. And I would like to know, as one of your customers, why Oregon state agencies continue their review. It appears to me as a waste of skilled worker time and state's fiscal resources. Governor, you have admonished many of us to continue to participate in these permitting processes, and that you've given assurances that you will follow all laws and regulatory processes to the letter. On multiple occasions, you have reminded us that your role is to ensure the permitting processes as customers entrusted to the state and federal agencies proceed in an orderly, lawful, and transparent fashion. You have strongly encouraged us to participate in permitting processes, and we have done that. We have raised many concerns with state officials. And here I am, yet again, vigorously participating in a process. And I am questioning why a third extension has been granted. We have raised serious issues about the project and followed the letter of the law, only to be routinely dismissed and ignored by many of the state agencies. The review process for these projects, from a customer service standpoint, has not felt orderly or transparent. More and more, the evidence is pointing to the state of Oregon's permit review process as a predisposed opportunity to provide for private business interests over the will and welfare of the customer, the people. You have said you want to change the way that Salem operates when it comes to elected officials who breach public trust. I believe you. Shutting the public out of the review process does, though, however, make those words ring hollow. At this moment, the Department of State Lands is reviewing an unprecedented removal fill permit for the Pacific Connector gas pipeline. Many conversations have taken place. Now, an extension has been granted to provide enough time for the department to conclude the review of remaining outstanding issues, including wetland delineation, fish passage, wetland and waterway impacts. The extension also states that the department needs additional time to complete administrative process steps in order to make a decision on the permit application. What does that even mean, administrative process steps? DSL officials have characterized this biased and I believe privileged treatment of incessant extension granting as working with the applicant. There appears to be one customer, and it is not me as a citizen of this state. I do not believe that DSL is tasked to serve as the guardian and the guide for this applicant by extending deadlines, which has been done 3 times now. I believe that the DSL director has sufficient information to deny these projects today if he were to follow his own guidelines the guidelines of this department and extend customer service to all Oregonians. Governor, we are being denied.
Stop, please. That will not be acceptable.
We are being denied critical information. And now, as a part of that extension, we are being denied additional time to comment regarding information. This is an alarming practice and certainly a breach of public trust. In particular, we have requested the GIS data provided to the department by the applicant in order to conduct its wetland review. I have been informed that DSL has signed a non-disclosure agreement with Pacific Connector to facilitate the review of the applicant's GIS maps. I am an impacted landowner. I have refused access to my property. You do not have all of the wetland information that they are being asked to review.
Ms. McLaughlin, you're well past your 3-minute time. Would you please wrap up your comments, please?
I certainly will.
Thank you.
I am exhausted with elected officials succumbing to political sway rather than taking bold action for the welfare of the people and the future generations to protect our environment. Governor Brown, the members of this coalition and affected landowners are not a bunch of bumpkins, as we have been characterized by Pacific Connector. We will not be a feckless flock of sheep in this issue. We are a diverse group of individuals, and we have this in common. We oppose the Pacific Connector and Jordan Cove projects because they are bad for Oregon, and they are bad for you, and they are dangerous to all of us. Not many of us are fortunate enough to receive the gift of power that each of you on this board possess. Through your positions, you literally have the opportunity to change the world. Do not take this authority lightly. The dangers associated with Jordan Cove and the Pacific Connector are much too possible, and they are far too perilous. A single moment of Mother Nature's ire or an innocent mistake by a rural firefighter could prove to be a devastating legacy for each of you. Do not squander the opportunity to set Oregon on the right path. You have the right and the responsibility to deny these permits. Please do it.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. I'm sure the director will be willing to address. Please, no clapping. Thank you. Director Paul?
Governor Brown, members of the board, would you like me to move on to another item?
Please.
Okay. The final agenda item, number 6, is our and the final action item is a request for approval to sell 0.21 acres of state-owned filled lands located in Columbia County. The issue is whether the state land board should authorize the director to execute a quitclaim deed with a conservation easement for the sale of state-owned filled lands to the adjacent property owner, Waterfront Place Condominium. This is an item that came before the land board for approval for the initial due diligence phase back in December. We have conducted our due diligence and the work needed there in order to bring the recommendation for sale before you today. Just as by way of background, this item originated back in 2009 when DSL received an application from the Waterfront Place Condominium Association. At that time, however, we recognized a number of issues that needed to be dealt with before we could entertain a potential sale, including a cloud on title with the City of Rainier, City of Rainier request for public walkway easement, and also the need for a conservation easement on a large portion of the property where there is a wetland mitigation project. DSL has worked through all 3 of these issues to ensure protection of those public trust values and believe now that given the protections we've put in place, we would recommend a sale of this property. Specifically, we have granted a public access easement to the City of Rainier, and as part of the requirement of this sale, we will be placing a conservation easement on this property for the permanent protection of that wetland mitigation site. So the recommendation before you is that that the land board approve the sale of these 0.21 acres of state-owned filled lands immediately adjacent to the Waterfront Place Condominium Association by quitclaim for a market value as determined by the department of $310, and that a conservation easement be placed in order to protect the wetland mitigation existing on the property.
Thank you, Director Paul. Questions, comments?
I think you went through this pretty thoroughly.
Okay.
I move adoption of the recommendation.
Secretary
Second.
Atkins has moved approval of the sale of 0.2 acres of state-owned field lands located in, probably don't need to get that too much detail. There's no further discussion, and we have a second on the motion, and no objection, so approved. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the agenda, unless there are any other items that the board wishes to bring forward today.
I think we're good for the day. Thank you very much, Director
Thank you.
Paul. Yes. All right. Well, here's the challenge we have is that folks that signed up for other, unless they put other, I'm assuming it was regarding LNG. So I am more than happy if you want to come talk about earthquake drills, but I will not tolerate further discussion about LNG siting, given the comments that I made earlier. But I'm happy to have you come talk about that if you would like to. Come on up. It's fine.
Thank you. My name is Frances Etherington. I'm from Roseburg, Oregon, and I did.
That's the hearing test for today. Wow.
And I wanted to talk about the earthquake tsunami drills that you held last week in the terms of what you did not drill for, and that is the LNG terminal on the coast. And so I'm not sure if you will allow me to speak on these drills because they excluded a huge potential problem with an earthquake with the LNG terminal situated on the fault line.
Thank you, Francis. We will note that for the record and appreciate your bringing that matter before the land board. Thank you.
I was going to mention that the earthquake, of course, will impact the Coast Range, and that the pipeline in the Coast Range is in a Class 1, the lowest safety standards used to build this pipeline in the Coast Range. Williams Company is saving lots of money on a lower safety standard, the lowest safety standard in the Coast Range, Class 1, where they can use the thinnest pipes possible, and this will be heavily impacted by this potential 9.0 earthquake.
Thank
you.
you.
If anything you should have included in the drill, you should have included the pipeline and the terminal. Why would you ignore this potential hazard in the tsunami earthquake?
Thank you. I'm very grateful that you brought this matter forward to the land board this morning and appreciate your time and energy on this issue. Thank you. Any other matters from the land board to come before the land board? All right. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
That